Virginia, where it's a nice minus 11 degrees today. But hey, 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 it's a great day to crochet. Today we're talking about the long-standing pattern, the granny square. It was first published in the Art of Crochet in 1891, making it over 132 years old. It wasn't actually published as a pattern though at first, it was only an engraving. But in 1897, the first workable pattern finally was published and people gravitated to it and haven't stopped since. The interest continues to ebb and flow over the past 132 years, and it's usually one of the very first patterns that crochet newbies put their hooks to. And to put things in perspective, this pattern is as old as my home. My home and this red building behind me was built in 1897. So that kind of gives you an idea of how old and how long this pattern has been around. Now in 2023, we saw an interest start to gain again in crochet world, and we saw bucket hats and afghans and scarves and purses and bags all made with granny squares. However, the powers that be in fiber world say that 2024 it's really going to get hot. So be looking for granny square new items and projects done with specialty yarn in chevrons and stripes, in different types of shapes, even geometric shapes like triangles and rectangles and squares. So expect to see creative new designs with modern twists this year with the granny square. And if you have never made one or had trouble in the past with learning how to make the granny square, follow me inside today and let's make one together. So let's begin our granny square. Now traditionally, we begin with a slip knot on our hook. You can work that any way you so choose. And we begin with a chain of 4. And slip stitch to the very first chain. Now it's going to look kind of tight in there right now, but it will stretch once we start crocheting. But right in here, you have created a open circle, and it's right here in this circle or this hole that we're going to be inserting our hook for our first round of stitches. Now some people prefer to make a magic circle when making a granny square, and that's when they prefer the hole to be completely closed, but we're going to go ahead and do a traditional. Now at this point we need to chain 3. 3 chains is the height of a double crochet. But I prefer to chain 2 because when I come back around to the other side, I'm going to join in a different spot that adds height, the rest of the height of this chain to the height of the double crochet that's next to it. And it will make more sense at the end. You'll see what I'm talking about. So if you want to follow me, chain 2. If you want to do just a traditional chain 3, do that as well. Both will work. Once you've decided on the height of the chain that you want to make here initially, work 2 double crochets right into the center of your circle. Insert that hook right into the hole that you created when you join to that first chain. So now, once you have chained up and you've worked 2 double crochets, you've actually created 1 granny cluster. 3 double crochets together equals 1 granny cluster. We will actually work 4 granny clusters all the way around by inserting our hook into the center of this hole that we created to create 4 sides. Every granny cluster makes a side. Now between each of those granny clusters, we need to make a corner, so we're going to chain 2. Your chain 2s will be the corners. Now that we've chained 2, we need to work another granny cluster, which is 3 double crochets into the same hole. So there's my next granny cluster. I have one here, separated by a chain 2, right here, first corner. My next side, granny cluster, 3 double crochets. All right, so let's make the next corner. Chain 2. Now we're back to a side. We're going to insert our hook right through the center again and work 3 more double crochets. And this tail that's hanging out in the back, I am just working all my double crochets right on top of the tail as I go around. So just let it hang out back there, crochet over it for now, and then when we're done, we can weave in what's left. All right, so I have 3 sides created, 3 granny clusters, 2 corners. I'm ready for another corner. Chain 2, work another side, 3 doubles, again, I'm just working right over my tail. Now that gives me my 4 sides. I have my first side, second side, third side, fourth side, but I only have 3 corners, so I need to end with a chain 2 to create my 4th corner. And here is where I was talking about where I'm going to join. Let me lay this down. If you chain 3 at the beginning, right here, then you want to slip stitch at the top of your chain 3. If you only chain 2, we want to slip stitch to the top of the first real double crochet that we created. So it's the middle stitch. And that's going to put the head of this chain 2 on the top. Okay, so I'm going to slip stitch to my first real double crochet. This second loop on my hook now, when I pull through, is going to fold over on top of my chain 2, creating that height that I need to make it as tall as the double that's next to it. It puts the top or the head of the stitch on when you do it this way. So see how that folded over? Now that second loop forms the head of my initial chain 2, and it's as tall as the double crochet that's next to it. So leave yourself a 4 or 5 inch tail, bind off. Okay, I've cut my yarn, broke my yarn, and now I'm just going to yarn over and pull it all the way through, and now it's secure, and I have my first round completed. Let's move on to round 2. So when beginning round 2, you're going to make a slip knot with your next chosen color. I'm going to use this fabulous orange. And this is right side up. This is where I left off. For the purpose of this tutorial, we're going to keep all of our work same side up, or right side facing up. So to join your new color, you're going to choose any of the corners that you made and slip stitch into that corner, and then chain 2 to begin. And in each of our corners, we are going to make 2 granny clusters separated by 2 chains. So now in this corner, we're going to work a double, work another double. That gives us 1 granny cluster in that corner. When we get back around to this other side, we will make the second granny cluster to complete that corner. Now we have to jump over this side, this granny cluster. And to be able to do that and not make our fabric scrunch up, we chain 1. Now we're going to place a granny cluster in the next corner. A granny cluster is 3 double crochets. We need to create our new corner for this round, so we chain 2. And we place 1 more granny cluster in the same corner. So work 3 doubles right back into the same corner here. Okay, can you see how that just formed up? We have a nice looking corner. So that brings us back to a side. To get over to the next corner, we gotta chain 1 so we can jump over that granny cluster without scrunching up our fabric. We want our squares to be flat, not cupped like a bowl. And then we're going to create 1 granny cluster, chain 2, 1 granny cluster in this next corner space. So there is 1, 2, 3. We have to create our corner, so we chain 2. Now we're going to work 1 more granny cluster in the same chain 2 space of the previous round. There you go. So there's our next corner that's been created. Now we're going to jump over this next side by chaining 1, which brings us to the 3rd corner. We're going to work a granny cluster. We have to create the corner, so chain 2. And 1 more granny cluster right into the same chain 2 space of the previous round. And I'm pulling one of my tails to the right so I can just crochet right over on top of it for now to anchor it and get it out of my way. And there is our 3rd corner of our granny square. We have 1 more side to jump over, so we chain 1. That brings us to our very first corner that we began. We only have 1 granny cluster in there, so now we have to make 1 more to finish that corner out. We also need to create the 4th corner by chaining 2. And once again, because I chained 2 for my initial chain, 1, 2, I'm actually going to slip stitch to this first real double that I made following my chain 2. So the stitch right in the middle, the double right here. So I'm going to insert my hook underneath the head of that stitch, yarn over, and when I pull through for my slip stitch, that second loop on my hook falls over and makes the head of the chain 2, bringing it to the height of the other doubles that are next to it. All right, and this is round 2. So what we need to do here is bind off, just as we did before on round 1. Yarn over, pull through, however you enjoy binding off your tails there. And that is the end of round 2. We are accumulating tails. Go ahead and choose your 3rd color, and we will begin on round 3. So again, we're doing a same side granny, which means all of our stitches are going to be the right side facing up. So instead of flipping back and forth every single round, all the front side of our stitches will be facing upward to give it a nice congruent pattern. So we've already bound off our second color, and just like we did on round 2, we are going to begin with a slip stitch on our hook. We can choose any corner we want to join, and what I like to do is I like to choose a different corner each time. Reason being is because you're going to have all these tails piling up in one area if you don't. And then you have all the tails to try to weave in the same general area, which might get kind of thick and lumpy. So if you pick a different corner each time, it spreads those tails out and gives a different area to weave in each of those tails at the end, keeping your square flat and looking nice. So because I've already have tail hanging here and I've got one up here, I'm going to choose this corner to start my round 3. So right into the chain 2 of that corner of round 2, you will make a slip stitch. And then if you're doing working your chains the way I am, you will chain 2. If not, chain 3. Now work a double into that same corner space and work one more double into that same corner space. That is our first granny of that corner. When we come back around to the other side, we will finish that corner. For now, we have to jump over this granny square, and so we chain 1. That brings us to a chain 1 space that we created or that we worked on the previous round. So any chain 1 spaces you come across on round 3, we work a granny cluster. We have to fill in that space with a granny cluster. Okay, so before we can get back to the next corner, we're going to have a side to work. Every round, you're going to have another side. So on round 3, you're going to have one side to create. On round 4, you're going to have 2 sides before you reach a corner. On round 5, you would have 3 sides that you would need to work before you reach the next corner. It increases by multiple of 1 each round. So now that we've created this side cluster, we have to jump over this one to get back to the corner. So we chain 1. Now we work our next corner, which is 1 granny cluster, chain 2, 1 granny cluster, all in the same corner space of the previous round. Now I need to jump over this granny, so I chain 1. I have reached a chain 1 side that I need to create a granny cluster for. So we're going to work a granny cluster into the chain 1 of the previous round. We're going to jump to the next corner over this granny by chaining 1. This brings us back to the next corner where we work 1 granny cluster, chain 2, and 1 granny cluster. So the corners get chain 2s, the sides get chain 1s. So we're going to jump over this granny by chaining 1, working another cluster for a side, we're going to jump over the next granny by chaining 1, and I'm going to lay my tail and crochet the next corner right on top of it to anchor it, get it out of the way. There we go. And we're going to work 1 granny cluster, chain 2, 1 granny cluster. Need to pull some more yarn out. It's getting tight on me. There we go. All right, so that's my 3rd corner. I have 3 corners so far. Now we're going to jump over the next granny of the previous round by chaining 1 and working a granny cluster in the chain 1 of the previous round for the next side. Chain 1 to jump over this last granny. This brings us to the initial corner that we started at. So I'm going to pull this yellow tail to the side and work over it to anchor it while I work the last granny cluster into this corner, like so. Now I have to finish off my corner, so I chain 2 and I join to that initial real first double crochet with a slip stitch. And there you have round 3. Let me back away from the camera just a little bit so you can see. And there is round 3 completed. So let's work one more round together. So I need to bind off the yellow. And pull it through and anchor it down. Okay. So as you can see, all of our stitches are facing up, right side facing up by using this method. Let's move on to round 4. So when choosing a corner, again, I'm going to look at the back side and kind of see where all my tails are coming from. I have an empty corner here, an available corner with no tails. So I'm going to start my next round on that corner. And the fun thing about granny squares is that you can get really wild with your colors, or you can be more conservative and planned out. It's a great scrapgan project to make to use up all your leftover yarn. I'm going to use a different shade of blue to make my 4th round. So I'm going to slip stitch to this corner and chain 2 and work 2 more double crochets right next to it into the same corner to begin my 4th round. And right off the bat, I've got to jump over a granny square, so I'm going to chain 1. Now, if you notice, a corner, side cluster, corner. Side cluster, corner, side, corner, side, and finish up the corner. So on round 4, we have 2 side clusters that we'll need to make before reaching the next corner. So I've already chained 1 to jump my granny of the previous round. Now I'm going to work my first side cluster, 3 doubles right into that chain 1 of the previous round. Going to jump over this one by chaining 1. Make another side cluster, 3 doubles right into the chain 1 of the previous round. Now to get to this next corner, I've got to jump my last cluster here, so chain 1, and I'm back to a corner, which a corner is granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster. This is just kind of, once you get the pattern, it just becomes so second nature. You can sit and watch TV and make these, and just, it's kind of a mindless pattern fun to do too. And it can be incorporated into so many different things. Purses, hats, stuffed animals, cardigans, not just blankets. All right, so I'm coming back to my next corner, so I'm going to chain 1. And I'm going to do a granny cluster. Sometimes I say cluster, sometimes I say granny. It means the same thing. Okay, make my corner by chaining 2 and working another cluster right into that same corner. And chain 1 to jump to the next side. Chain 1 to jump the next side. The next side cluster. And that will bring us back to the corner. We need to chain 1 to jump this granny cluster here. I'm going to fold my tail over and work my next corner stitches right over that tail to anchor it and keep it out of my way. And come back and weave in all these tails later. So I'm working a corner, so I have 1 granny cluster separated by a chain 2 and another granny cluster. Okay, we got to jump the next granny, so chain 1 and work your side granny here. Got to jump this one, so chain 1. I'm gonna probably just leave that tail over there for now. Work your last side granny. And pull some more yarn. And now we need to jump this very last granny. I'm going to go ahead and pull my tail to the right. I'm going to chain 1. And now I'm going to work my last granny cluster of the round right into this corner here. And I need to join that corner by chaining 2. That creates my last 4th corner. And slip stitching right into there. And now we have our final 4th round is finished of our granny square. So here's my granny square. I have woven in all my ends, so now it's clean on the back side. And there you have it. And from here on out, you can place a border of your choosing or leave it on the last round to join to more motifs for whatever project you're making. Now, the caveat to making granny squares are all the tails. And because each round will give you 2 tails to weave in. Now, Red Heart has just come out with a yarn specifically for granny squares that promotes the idea and function that you won't have any tails, that the color changes will take place if you use the right hook size and the right tension. That change of color will happen at the exact point that you need to, eliminating, binding off, and creating a tail. I believe it's called Granny Square All-in-One, but it's made by Red Heart. I am not promoting this. I'm just letting you know that it's out there to try. I have not even tried it myself, but if you are like me and hate weaving in tails, you may want to give it a try if you like Red Heart yarn.
Okay.
So thank you for
So-
spending time with me today and learning how to make the granny square. Stay tuned for upcoming videos on how to make the granny rectangle, the granny triangle, the granny circle, and the granny anything coming up soon. And if you haven't yet, subscribe below to my channel so you won't miss these great upcoming videos. Also, if it's helped you today in your crochet life, comment below. I would love to get to know you because crochet and by the stitch is where creativity builds community.